In what isn't a surprising development, the new study out showing that private equity is literally killing people. In this case, hospitals. Hospitals that have been acquired by private equity firms have actually seen their death rates increase. It's according to a study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. Researchers found that private equity acquisition actually leads to increased deaths in places like nursing homes, increased postoperative complications for common inpatient surgeries at hospitals, and even an increase in medical conditions acquired in the hospitals. This is, for example, bloodstream infections and injuries from falls. You also have more deaths among emergency department patients that are receiving Medicare. Now, that's very important here, okay? Now, according to Martin Kenny, a professor in the Department of Human Ecology at the University of California, Davis, and author of Private Equity and the Demise of the Local, said this, quote, "Each of them sort of comes up with the same result. Private equity takes over things in the medical field, quality goes down, prices go up. And so did the profits." Shocker. Now, this study compared staff levels, wages, and patient mortality in 49 private equity acquired hospitals with 293 non-private equity control hospitals, and found that the private equity hospitals had smaller staff numbers, smaller salaries, and that there were more deaths, larger deaths. There were 7 more deaths per 10,000 patients in the private equity hospitals' emergency departments. That's around 700 excess deaths among the million emergency department visits the researchers had investigated. There you go. Now, all the patient records, or all the patients whose records were included in the study, were Medicare recipients. So now think about who's on Medicare. Elderly folks and the disabled. Now, Zirui Song, an associate professor of healthcare policy and medicine at Harvard, this is the Harvard Medical School, and one of the study's authors, said that one of the main things is cutting staff, okay? Especially in emergency departments that serve Medicare patients, okay? She called it especially problematic. The study, by the way, notes that private equity hospitals had cut emergency department salaries by 18.2% on average and reduced the number of full-time hospital employees by 11.6%. You know, in order to meet those quarterly profit quotas. Now, she said, some patients in emergency departments come in critically ill, requiring all hands on deck to care for them. Trauma, respiratory failure, sepsis, heart attack, and stroke are a few examples of such conditions often seen in emergency departments. He also said of Medicare patients that they may require special attention, as they are on average older with more health conditions and are more vulnerable relative to commercially insured patients. Now, those are the types of patients whom private equity does not really care for. Not only that, but hospitals, of course, don't get as much return from the Medicare reimbursement rates, since they're not all that high. So it makes me kind of think that private equity views these Medicare patients as, if they die, they die. We would rather not serve them at all, really, if we can. In fact, in many cases, these hospitals reject some of these higher risk patients in order to try to keep the costs down and their profits high. But of course, now they've expanded that to their emergency departments. In fact, according to Song's study, private equity-owned hospitals transferred about 12% more emergency patients out to other hospitals. And those patients were more likely to have multiple conditions. Sicker patients are transferred out to other hospitals, often because the first hospital lacks the bandwidth, capacity, or resources to take care of them, Song said. Now, she said, look, that should mean that the patients that remain in the original hospital end up getting more attention overall, right? and have better outcomes. But that's not what's happening. In fact, those people are dying. More people are dying. And Song says that should be rather concerning. Quote, some cuts in expenditures may improve the efficiency of hospital operations, but other cuts may be harmful to patient care. Well, I mean, this is what happens when private equity comes into the picture, okay? They're doing to healthcare what they did to Toys R Us. But instead of, cutting some jobs here and there and maybe closing down a few stores, they're killing your grandma, basically. And there's really not any way for the average person to fight back against this. As Martin Kenny had pointed out, you can't really sue the private equity firm because the private equity firm happens to be insulated. They buy up the hospital and that just goes right into their portfolio. By law, plaintiffs have to meet a very high bar to show that these private equity firms were directly involved in the healthcare company's day-to-day operations. That's even if the firm directly profited from the cost cutting that resulted in harm. And so most people can't really bring a case that shows that. And look, basically the only thing you could do is maybe sue the hospital or whatever healthcare company you're dealing with here that caused the harm. But that doesn't really do anything to solve the problem. In fact, it basically bankrupts the hospital. It could. And then the hospital goes bankrupt and closes down or whatever. And then the patient that has been harmed still ends up holding the bag. There's no accountability for these equity firms, okay, that have been buying up pretty much everything in our economy. I mean, you've got companies, of course, that have been bought by them. Like, think about Bain Capital and Mitt Romney and what they did and buying up these companies and then loading them up with debt and then taking all the money. And when the company falls apart, well, I mean, they don't really lose out on anything, these firms. And so they fire a bunch of people, everybody loses their job, and then, these executives walk away with tons of money. And that's it. And they do that for companies, but they've also been buying up real estate. And that's one of the reasons why people can't get a home anymore, okay? I mean, there's plenty of supply, plenty of homes out there, plenty of places to live, but they've been bought up by private equity firms that will then turn them into rentals and rent them out at increasingly higher and higher rents. And of course, because of the decreased supply of homes, that drives up home prices. So there's that. Not only that, but they buy up food supply. Okay, you got J.D. Vance that has a firm that is invested in a firm, I should say, along with Peter Thiel, that buys up distressed farmland. And so private equity, again, controlling our food supply. And as more and more farmers go bankrupt as a result of Trump's tariffs, you're going to have even more bankruptcies and even more consolidation of our food supply being owned by private equity. And now, of course, hospitals. Hospitals. Again, they're running these companies into the ground. They're killing jobs. They're raising your rent, your home prices, and they're killing grandma and grandpa. That's one of the big problems here. Okay? And again, the hospitals are just part of a much bigger problem. And in order for that to change, however, Kenny says, well, look, Congress would have to pass a law saying that private equity firm is responsible for the activities of the firms in its portfolio. How likely is that to happen? Not very, says Kenny. Oof. Look who owns our Congress and the executive branch too. Yes, billionaires, private equity. So, I mean, it kind of feels like we're cooked here, all right? Because of all the money in politics. And, yeah, I'm a logical leftist, right? So this in order to be a leftist, you got to be anti-capitalist. This is why I'm anti-capitalist, okay? This is the end result of unfettered capitalism, okay? And unlike what you might be able to do with some of the other industries, right? I mean, they always tell you, well, just vote for your wallet. Yeah, go pay, go get something else. Shop somewhere else. Shop around. Can't really do that. Can't really do that. When it comes to the emergency room, you don't really have much of a choice here. When it comes to healthcare, you don't really have much of a choice. It's life or death. And let me tell you, if a private equity guy can make an extra buck off letting you die, that is a sacrifice that he will gladly make. Okay? He will sacrifice you to the market. This is why things like education, this is why healthcare, food and housing, the very basics to survive should not be commodified, okay? You shouldn't be able to make profit off these things, all right? They should be a human right. We're not talking about making shoes or PlayStations or widgets, Widgets, funny word. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the basic things that you need to survive. Those we have so much of. We have so much of. They should be a human right. Everyone should have them. And it should be an absolute guarantee that you have a place to live, that you can have food and water. Okay? We can do that in this country. We just choose not to. Instead, we would rather, as a nation and an economy, apparently have some private equity a-holes on Wall Street come in, buy up your hospital, fire a bunch of staff so that they can get more money, even if it means grandma and grandpa die. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, you become a member on our YouTube page, you become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.